ladies and gentlemen, here we are in this beautiful state of Arizona. We're just a few miles outside of Winslow, Arizona, right along I-40. We're at the great Meteor crater site. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the Director of Operations here, and he's going to share with us some of the wonderful things about this meteor site that it causes one to pause and ponder and really put the old gray matter in low gear as we see documented what has happened in the past. Mr. Brad Andes, it's a pleasure being here with you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We're real happy you decided to stop by and visit us this morning. We're here at the site of the first proven meteorite impact on Earth. And the history here goes way back to the late 1800s, the recorded history. In 1871, one of the first people that ever saw this place, in fact the first person to be given credit for seeing it, was one of General George Custer's scouts. His name was Franklin, and for a long time this was called Franklin's Hole. And then the modern history goes to about 1891. The head USGS geologist, a fellow by the name of G.K. Gilbert, had heard about this place, had hoped it was a meteorite impact site, and came out hopefully with the intentions of proving that that in fact was the case. But he came out and spent about 2 weeks researching and came to the conclusion that no, it was probably just another volcanic crater like the ones closer to Flagstaff. We're surrounded by volcanic craters here. And he pretty well suspected that this was in fact a volcanic crater as opposed to an impact crater. But he hadn't brought any technological equipment to do any research or studies with. So he pretty much just went on the fact that he didn't find a massive piece of meteorite, and a compass needle wasn't affected by proximity to the crater. And since the meteorite that hit here was 92% iron, he felt that if a meteorite that could cause a hole or crater 4,100 feet across, if it was created by an iron meteorite, then that meteorite should be about 4,100 feet across and should in fact affect a compass needle. Well, in 1902, a mining engineer by the name of Daniel Beringer became familiar with the crater. A gentleman that worked for the Forest Service told him about it. Mr. Beringer immediately felt that it might be an impact site, especially because of the meteorite fragments that were found around it. And Mr. Gilbert thought that was just coincidental. Mr. Beringer came out, looked at the site, and became convinced at first glance that it must be an impact site. You have to bear in mind that at this time there had never been a place on Earth proven to be an impact site, a crater that was created from something falling from space and impacting with the Earth. So Mr. Beringer had his work cut out for him to try to prove over the objections of the USGS that this was in fact an impact crater. He began drilling first in the middle of the crater to try to find the meteorite itself. Again, there wasn't anything known about the mechanics of impact cratering. At that time they felt, well, if the crater is 4,100 feet across, then it makes sense that the meteorite itself must be 4,100 feet across. And they assumed that it was probably just underneath the surface of the floor of the crater. So they started digging a shaft and got down about 180 feet and ran into the water table. At that point, the rock and gravel that they were bringing up turned to quicksand, and they had to abandon that shaft. So they moved a short distance away, tried a second shaft, and that was unproductive. And then they moved another little distance away, dug another hand-dug shaft. It went down about 140 feet, and again, they didn't find any significant pieces of meteorite. In 1902, Mr. Beringer filed 4 mining claims that centered in the middle of the crater. And in 1903, he got the patents to the property signed by Theodore Roosevelt, who was president at the time. And at that time, this property became privately owned. Basically, the federal government didn't see any value to it. So it did become privately owned, and it has been privately owned at that time, since that time. Over the years, as development has happened here. There's been no government involvement at all. This is a totally private enterprise. Any developments that have been made here, any improvements and all the operations have been totally privately funded, and those revenues basically generated by the people that come to visit. We don't get any tax revenues or anything like that to help support the admission price. Back to the history. Mr. Beringer in 1903 started digging all these shafts. When it became obvious that they weren't going to get the information they wanted by hand digging all the shafts, and they kept running into water that was creating a major problem for them to dig by hand, they started using a drilling rig. They drilled 28 holes in the bottom of the crater, the floor of the crater at different areas, and were able to get a real good topography of underneath the surface of the crater. So they started getting information put together, possibly on what direction the meteorite came from when it impacted. The floor of the crater, the solid floor of the crater, slopes roughly from the north toward the south. And the last hole they drilled, the 29th hole, they drilled from on top of the rim on the south side. They did that hoping, again, to get away from the water problem. Every place they drilled, they ran into water when they get down, 400 or 500 feet. So they became frustrated with that and thinking, well, possibly because when the meteorite impacted, it compacted the earth underneath the surface. It may have formed a perched water table. In other words, the crater was just like a big cereal bowl, and the water was sitting within that. So that, well, if they got up on top of the rim and drilled down, maybe they would get away from that perched water table. They started drilling, got down a little over 200 feet, and the drilling rig, the drill bit, which if you look at it, it looks like an old well casing that has teeth cut into it. Certainly wasn't up to modern day technology. But the drill bit bit into a piece of meteorite, and the meteorite is harder and more solid than the drill bit was. The drill bit bit into the meteorite, froze, and drilling had to be stopped. At that time, they dug a cross shaft about 230 feet below the rim of the crater over to the drill bit, freed the bit, put a new one on, and they were able to continue drilling. They got down to about 1,376 feet when, again, the drilling rig, the drill bit into a piece of meteorite and basically corkscrewed the drilling cable, and that was the end of the drilling in that hole. But at that time, Mr. Beringer felt that he had found the big piece of the meteorite. And it was several years after that Mr. Beringer was able to get funding from other private sources to try to continue his exploration to find the big piece of the meteorite. Mr. Beringer, being a mining engineer by trade, was interested in hopefully mining the meteorite. It's 92% iron, 7% nickel, and there are also traces of iridium and cobalt, iridium being a platinum derivative. He felt that just the platinum alone that he could get out of a meteorite that was 4,100 feet across would pay for the mining operations, and then of course the amount of iron and nickel that would be tremendous. So he was able to put investors together in the late teens and early 20s. They started hand digging one last shaft, and again trying to get outside what they hoped was a perched water table. They moved about a quarter of a mile outside the rim of the crater. They started digging a shaft. They got down about 600 feet and ran into the water again. They bought what at that time was the two biggest water pumps available anywhere in the world, and started pumping water out of the bottom of the shaft. And as they'd go down, they'd shore the shaft up with concrete to try to keep the water out. This process worked fairly well until they got down a little over 700 feet. Then it became, the water was just coming in faster than they could pump it out. And after a period of 2 years, they had to abandon trying to dig down there. After 2 years, they shut the water off, they shut the pumps off, and within about 10 minutes, the water was back to the level it was that they'd started pumping 2 years before. What Mr. Beringer didn't realize is he was trying to pump the biggest aquifer in northern Arizona dry. There was no perched water table. In fact, the water he was pumping out onto the desert, it was going back down into the aquifer, and he was, in some cases, recycling the same water that he was pumping out. Well, it had been filtered quite a few times by the time it had been pumped and run back down through the aquifer. After the hand dug shaft, the final hand dug shaft, wasn't successful. There's been not much more attempt to recover the meteorite. At that point, it was pretty late in Mr. Beringer's life. He had owned the property that contained the crater about 25 years and had been trying ever since he took possession of the property to prove to the scientific community that it was in fact a meteorite impact site, not a volcanic site. And over the period of about 25 years and the expense of pretty much his entire family fortune, he was eventually able to prove to the scientists that this was an impact site, not a volcanic crater. He died in 1929, and he was able to see his theory that this was an impact site finally accepted by the scientific community. Until after his death, really not much went on here until the early 40s. At that time, the RT Bar Ranch Company, which owned the ranch surrounding the crater, the ranch contains about 305,000 acres. At that time, they entered into a partnership with the Beringers, or not necessarily a partnership, but into an agreement with the Beringers, where the RT Bar Ranch Company would operate a tourist attraction here. There was an old brick building that was constructed down at the eastern on the eastern side of the museum. That was, on the eastern side of the crater, and that became the first museum. The old rock building was not much more than most people's bedrooms or living rooms at best. It was probably 10 feet wide and maybe 15 to 20 feet long. The museum basically consisted of rock and meteorite samples that were from here. The Halsinger meteorite, which is the largest meteorite that was found here, weighs a little over 1,400 pounds, was on display there. It has since been moved to the modern museum. But for quite a number of years, the old museum and the crater were pretty much what attracted people here. They had to drive 5.5 miles down a rocky, rough, dusty dirt road to get here. Get the car to climb up the side of the crater to get into the parking lot. And in January 1st, 1942, admission was charged, and it was 25 cents per person to come and see the crater. There was a taped lecture that you pushed a button that was on a pole, and a tape recording came on, and it gave you a brief description of the crater. And that was the visitor center at Meteor Crater. In 1955, that old museum burned. In fact, at that point in time, it was being used as housing quarters for one of the ranch hands. And unfortunately, a kerosene lamp got knocked over, and the building came down with it. The rock walls didn't burn, but they have since, most of them, fallen down because of the wind and people helping them fall down over the years. In the mid-40s and 50s, there are some other buildings that were constructed here out on the back side of the crater. They're basically wooden buildings that were used for housing and storage for a mining operation that was for not the meteorite, but for the sand that the meteorite created. It's silica sand. It's over 99% pure, and it was very highly praised and sought after to be used for telescope lenses. It was so pure that the glass that came from it was very high quality. And so for a while, there was a mining operation just for the sand that came off the back side of the crater. That didn't go on for too many years, but it was another interesting side effect of the crater being formed. In the late 50s, the new museum was constructed. We call it the new museum, the modern museum. It had a number of picture windows on the south side that faced out at the crater, so anybody that was here could get a great view of the entire crater from the windows. One of the strange natural things that occurs here is we get a tremendous amount of wind in the spring. It's not at all uncommon for us to get wind that's over over 100 miles an hour. About a year and a half ago, we had one gust that was in excess of 185 miles an hour. In fact, it picked up one of the employees' vehicles and carried it down over the edge of the crater. Parked it on top of some boulders, and it took 2 tow trucks to get it back up on top. So we did get some pretty excessive winds. Those big windows that were on the original museum faced directly at the wind. And we were having a big windstorm one day, and those windows blew out, and shortly after, the wind coming in through the windows blew the roof off the museum, and the museum needed to be seriously remodeled after that. So after a couple years, the museum was remodeled to be basically as it is today. We still have one big picture window out the back and several little ones that folks can still see the crater from the museum, but they don't have to worry about the wind taking the window away while they're standing there looking at it. Of the things that you can see from that window, basically the crater takes up the entire view. We have a lot of people come and want to take pictures of the crater, and unless you're in a plane way up in the air, it takes 4 or 5 shots to get the entire crater. It is 4,100 feet across. It's over 3 miles in circumference. It's about 570 feet deep, and was formed when the meteorite traveling over 43,000 miles impacted the Earth. When that happened, they estimate about 3 million tons of debris was thrown out and scattered around the countryside. The meteorite itself, 80% of it vaporized into metallic steam, and of course went up and cooled and condensed and came back down as little tiny particles. It just looks like black sand that's scattered around for miles. 5% of the meteorite flaked off the outside as it was coming through the atmosphere, burned off the outside. 5% of it was physically blasted out of the crater, and those pieces of meteorite have been found on and off over the years. And then 10% they feel still lies underneath the south wall of the crater. A little more about USGS involvement. In the mid to late 50s, a USGS employee by the name of Dr. Eugene Shoemaker became interested in the crater, contacted the Beringers, and asked if he could do research here. The Beringers were more than happy to have him working out here. And Dr. Shoemaker did a tremendous amount of research here and developed a great amount of the information that exists today about Meteor Crater. Dr. Dave Roddy, also with USGS, has spent a tremendous amount of time here, and between the two of them have developed a great amount of information about what they found here. Since this is the first proven impact site, it's if you will, the prototype for meteorite impact sites on the Earth. Because of what they found here, they've been able to go around the world and find other old impact sites that aren't as well preserved as this. Many of the impact sites, standing there looking, they just look like flat ground before you that maybe has a ridge of mountains around it. That ridge of mountains is actually the top of the rim of what used to be a big crater. But since it is filled back in, it's not evident and obvious that it was an impact site. But because of the things that they learned here, things that they found no place else on Earth before that, they have been able to prove that there are a lot of impact sites around the Earth, just as there are when you look at the moon. Most of the craters you see on the moon are impact sites, and it just stands to reason that over billions of years we haven't dodged all the rocks that came through space at us. And so this Meteor Crater was a very important part, was an essential part of scientists being able to determine that yes, there are other impact sites around the world. One that's getting a lot of notoriety right now is the one down in the Yucatan Peninsula that some scientists feel may be responsible for the demise of the dinosaurs. That particular crater, I believe, is about 130 miles across, and they estimate that the asteroid that hit that was 5 to 6 kilometers across, so which would have just made a tremendous explosion, much greater than anything that the Earth has ever seen that was man-caused. In fact, the force of the explosion here was significantly greater than the largest atomic weapon ever detonated. So they estimate a lot of the crater is underneath the ocean, the Yucatan crater. They estimate that the tidal wave from that could have been as high as 25 miles. And just that could have been responsible for the demise of a lot of living creatures on the Earth, not to mention the environmental impacts and the atmospheric impacts it would have had. The climate could have been seriously changed for a long enough period of time that the food chain was seriously disrupted, as well as just the climate and temperatures. So there are a lot of theories about the creation of life on Earth, as well as sometimes the extinction of life on Earth, that relate directly back to impact sites. As far as some of how original life may have started here, they have dissected pieces of meteorites and found fossils of amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of life, and so there are some folks that like to theorize, well, maybe something that turned into life here may have come from space. That's a debate that may go on for years, and I don't know if it'll ever be solved, but it's interesting to think about. In 1961, the new museum was started. It's significantly bigger than the original museum was. There are two major areas of the museum. The first part of it deals with meteorites, the mechanics of impact cratering, and to some extent the history of what has happened here at Meteor Crater. There's a film in there, about a 7-minute long film, that goes into detail how the crater was formed and some of the effects of the impact. As you go to the other end of the museum, we have the Astronaut Hall of Fame. And the reason that we're tied in with the space program, or that we have an interest in the space program, is that all the Apollo astronauts trained here. It was the feeling of the folks at NASA that the topography here is very similar to what they might run into on the moon. There's also another reason why they wanted their folks trained here. One of the characteristics of impact craters is that things that come out of the bottom land on top. What came from the lowest point of the crater floor is on top out here on the rim of the crater. And because of that characteristic of impact craterings, there was a definite value to the astronauts knowing where to take samples, so they could take samples from around the rim of a crater that could conceivably have come from, in some cases, a mile or so deeper below the surface of the moon. This way they didn't have to take drilling apparatus and take the time to set it up. They could get material from below the surface of the moon simply by knowing where to pick up the rocks. They trained both here and at Sunset Crater, and became knowledgeable about the geology of impact craters, as well as being able to operate the lunar rover that they used when they were up on the surface of the moon. So we have dedicated part of the museum to the Astronaut Hall of Fame. All of the space missions prior to the shuttle are listed in detail in plaques on the wall. Brief descriptions of what those missions were about are on those plaques. The space shuttle program, there's been so many of those that we just don't have enough wall space to keep up with all of the space shuttle missions. Also at the east end of the museum, we have an interactive computer. And on that there are 4 different programs. One discusses a brief history of Meteor Crater. One talks about meteorites and asteroids themselves, how they're formed, some of the effects that they have when they impact something. There's also a section on the space program, and each individual space program, again prior to the space shuttle missions, can be called up, and you can look at detailed information about each of those missions. And then there's also a section on our solar system, and it goes into very informative detail about all the planets in the solar system, as well as a lot of the moons. It's been a great resource for us, as well as a lot of the folks that come to visit. We have a tremendous number of school teachers that have asked if they could ever get that information. So we did put it on a videotape. We put the entire computer program on a videotape that you can plug in your VCR and watch it. We send lots of those to school teachers from all over the world. When they stop here, they ask if they can get that information. And they can either pick it up here or we send it to them, and they use that information as reference for their classrooms. So we feel very fortunate that we have something that's that useful and that informative here. Something else that we will be putting in the near future is an interactive display on the upcoming impact on Jupiter. Next July, there's supposed to be 21 fragments from a comet impact the backside of Jupiter. And right now they're trying to get the Hubble telescope trained, as well as one of the other space probes trained on Jupiter, so they can get as much information as they can about the impact that occurs there. Since the impact is supposed to occur on the backside, we won't be able to get any direct shots of what happens. But I feel the heat generated from that impact may be so intense that just the light from the impact may be reflected off the moons, and they may be able to get some idea what happens just from that. Also, Jupiter, the days are only 10 hours long instead of 24, so it may be rotating fast enough that we can still see aftermath of the impacts through Hubble when as the planet turns. The comet, as I understand it, was one that was broken up as it went by Jupiter, and it was broken up by the gravitational forces of Jupiter, gone down, circled around the sun, and is coming back. And as it heads back in toward the sun again, these fragments that were caused by the breaking up when it went by the first time, there are 21 of them, and so they should impact over a period of 2 or 3 days, as I understand it. So we're going to have an interactive display on that will be updated on a regular basis as we can get information from U.S. Geological Survey. One of the activities that we encourage people to participate in here at Meteor Crater is hiking of the Rim Trail. The Rim Trail is a little over 3 miles long, and it does go around the entire circumference of the crater. It's amazing to a lot of people to go around there and see the aftermath of the impact of the crater that's still there. The changing in rock formations, the tremendous boulders that were physically thrown out of the bottom of the crater that lasted on top. Some are as big as small houses. There are 3 different basic types of rock here. We have, on top is the Moenkopi sandstone. It's a yellowish or a reddish brown rock that was formed from sand being blown in over centuries, and then a sea coming in on top of that sand and the pressure forming it into sandstone or rock. That layer is about 15 to 25 feet thick, depending on where you are. The next layer down is Kaibab limestone. And the limestone layer is about 700 feet thick, and it was formed basically by the shells of crustaceans. Over the years, when this was a sea, the crustaceans would die, their shells would sink to the bottom, and over millions and millions of years, that was deposited in a layer 700 feet thick, and again, the weight of the water formed that into limestone. We find a lot of fossils here, most of it small sea life type fossils. Once in a while we'll find a bone fossil that we're not real sure what it is. We would like to get it analyzed someday to see if they can determine what it was caused by or what it was made from. But there, at one point in time, there has been a lot of life here. Underneath the limestone layer, there's a layer of coconino sandstone. It's a white sand, and it was deposited from sand being washed in by water evidently when the sea was being formed. But again, the weight of the water fused it into rock. So we've got 3 distinct layers here. On the bottom of the crater, there's the coconino sandstone. The next layer up is the limestone. And then on the very top, there's another type of sandstone, the Moenkopi. The sandstone from the bottom of the crater that was physically blasted out and landed on top of the rim is what was mined for the telescope lens glass. Going around the rim of the crater, there are several interesting points that people can stop and look at. There are small signs that are at each of those points to give information about either the geology of the crater or some of the history of the crater. Some of the interesting places as you go around. One would be a mule-powered winch that's on top of the rim. It just looks like a big spool with logs coming out of it that they hook the mules to. But that winch was used to to power a cable that raised and lowered things that were on a big slide that raised and lowered things to the bottom of the crater. When they wanted to drop something down, they'd unwind the spool. If something was heavy, slide it down. And when they wanted to bring something back up, they'd unwind the spool and hook onto it and slide it back up. And they used mules to power the winch. Also on the rim trail is what we call the house-sized rock. It's a giant limestone boulder that, again, is as big as some houses, that was thrown out of the bottom of the crater and landed on top of the rim. It and a few of the other rocks on the rim of the crater were used in a dating technique to determine how old the crater was. The cosmogenic dating is the method that was used. And basically, how it works is as things are exposed to the sun, they accumulate a certain type of ion. And that accumulation takes place at a given steady rate. Here at the crater, we have rock that essentially had never been exposed to sunlight and then instantaneously was. So they have a very good starting date at when the rock started to accumulate this ion from the solar radiation. So they feel they've been able to come fairly close to the estimated age of the crater, which is now just under 50,000 years. Someplace like the Grand Canyon that has basically been formed by erosion, this dating technique may not work quite as well because the rock is exposed over a long period of time as opposed to just being instantly thrust up onto the surface. There are a number of other geological places to look at as you're going around the rim of the crater. I think some of the more interesting ones are actually on the south side, away from the visitor center. One of the things you see down there, there's a juniper forest, and it's the only place within several miles that you find any considerable vegetation to speak of. The juniper forest is also in an area that gets a tremendous amount of blow sand, and evidently that sand may come in, help hold some of the moisture so the trees can get started. Once they get started, they seem to do okay. They can withstand the tremendous amount of wind that we get out here. They don't get to be huge trees, but some of them have been dated back to be 700 to 800 years old. A little farther around the rim, you'll find the remains of the old cabins that were used in the mining operation, as well as seeing part of the mining operation, the remains of what was the mining operation for the silica sand. Continuing on around the rim, you'll get to eventually what's called the highest point. It's called Beringer Point. It's about 129 feet higher than the lowest point on the rim, and it's a pretty good hike up to the top of Beringer Point if you're coming from the south. But you get up there and you can see for miles and miles and miles. On a clear day, you can see as far as the curvature of the earth, and there's not a lot to get in your way out here. You're 150 feet above everything around you for, in some cases, 100 miles, and you can see that far. We have a lot of people from the eastern part of the country or from Europe where there's a lot of vegetation, and maybe visibility is restricted in most places. They stand up here on the top of the rim and look, and they're just awestruck by the fact that there is nothing out there to block your view. And some years when we don't have a lot of rain and it looks maybe kind of dry and desolate to us, as high grassland gets sometime, we'll have people stand there at the window and just say, "Boy, this is beautiful." And I'm wondering if they're looking out the same window I am. But it's a total change from what they're used to. It's the same. If I go back and look at their forest, I think, "Boy, this is beautiful." And they say, "Well, it's just trees." The beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And out here, we're pretty used to this scenery, and maybe sometimes take it for granted a little bit. But our visitors remind us on a pretty steady basis. This is some pretty awesome scenery and very unique countryside that we live in. The rim trail does take off from what we call Moon Mountain. On top of Moon Mountain, there's a telescope that you can pick different points of interest from around the crater and see them in as close as detail as you'll be able to see them in many cases. For insurance purposes, we can't allow people to hike down into the bottom of the crater anymore, which is somewhat unfortunate, but that's unfortunately the way the world works today. Back up until the mid-70s, we encouraged people to hike down if they were physically able to do so. It is a very strenuous hike. As you can imagine, you go to 6,000 feet elevation and start hiking up what's almost a sheer wall of 570 feet. If you're not in pretty good shape, it wears on you very quickly. But it is like a whole different world down at the bottom of the crater. It has vegetation that is similar to what's in the surrounding area, but in some cases it's also very different. There's a tremendous amount of wildlife down there. We have had bears. We have pictures of bears down in the crater. There's a lot of small life, rodents, rabbits, that type of thing. Coyotes, it's a favorite hunting ground for coyotes because of the large number of rodents. Coyotes love hunting down in the bottom of the crater. In the winter and spring, we have 2 red-tailed hawks that live here, and each year we get to see them flying beneath us much of the time hunting, and that's very interesting to watch. To be able to stand here and just watch them hunt is a source of entertainment for a lot of the tourists that come here. We get some unusual weather here at the crater. Very often we'll have weather that starts at the bottom of the rim of the crater that's very different than the surrounding area. Frequently we'll have fog here and the surrounding area is bright and sunny. We have an observation deck that hangs out over the crater so you can look straight down for well over a couple hundred feet. And there have been days when we've had fog so thick that you look down and you don't see anything except the fog. There are also days when it'll be bright and sunny here and the area surrounding us is totally fogged in. So the change in elevation seems to create its own weather. In the summertime, we'll frequently have storms that are coming from the southwest right at the crater. And they'll get to about the base of the crater, the base of the rim, and split and go around us. And after it goes around us, the 2 pieces of it will get back together and move on towards Winslow and rain all the way. Other days, there won't be any clouds any place, and it'll cloud up right on top of the crater, and we'll get soaked, and no place else gets any rain at all. So there are a lot of unique things about Meteor Crater that if you would like to learn something about maybe how parts of the Earth and parts of the solar system were formed, and you want to spend a little bit of time getting that information, it's a great place to bring your family and learn and get educated. At the facilities here, we have a snack bar as well as a gift shop, so people can come, and when they're done going through the museum and hiking the rim trail, they can sit and relax and get something to eat and get something to drink. And if they're like my family, shopping is as much an important part as a trip as learning things. So we try to have facilities available to everybody that somebody can enjoy a little bit of everything while they're here.
Is there a guess as to how high when it first?
They figure it's eroded about 25%. Originally, right now the floor of the crater is about 570 feet on an average below the rim of the crater. At one point the rim was probably 25% higher than that. Again, the wind has had a lot to do with that. Looking at the crater, you look at the floor down on the southwest side, the floor slopes pretty gently down. You don't see a lot of big boulders. That's just strictly a function of the fact that a lot of dust and sand over the last 50,000 years has come over that rim down there and has settled on that side of the crater. If you look on the south side, the north side, the northeast side, that's farthest from where the wind normally comes from, it's still very rocky and very steep. So there's definitely been a lot of material deposited on the floor of the crater over the years. Some of the material that's been deposited was a plane that crashed in the late 60s or about 1970. A couple airline pilots were ferrying a small Cessna from one part of the country to the other and thought it'd be neat to get a real close-up view of the crater. And unfortunately on that day the wind was blowing pretty hard and they got down in the crater and they buzzed around, and when they tried to get out, the wind formed sort of like a dome over the crater, and every time they'd try to get out, the wind would actually force them back down into the crater. And they flew around for a few minutes until they ended up going into the ground over there on the west side. There's still, most of the plane was carried off by Huey helicopters, but there's still, the smaller pieces were dropped down the old main shaft, and then there's still a couple pieces, part of the fuselage and part of the wing over there on the side. when the wind or the sun is at the right angle, you can still see those pieces of the airplane.
That'd be an experience.
Yeah.
Trapped.
Yes, it
Trapped
probably-
and flying in a hole.
No,
Boy,
it'll do.
I can imagine 2 airline pilots doing
Yeah,
that.
and fortunately they weren't killed. I guess one of them was in a body cast for a year, but the other one was okay. Well, just broken legs and things, but nothing major. It's pretty good size. It was big enough they could fly around, but it wasn't big enough they could try to get to where it flattens out, if you will. There's not a lot of flat ground down there. It looks like it from up here, but those little bushes you see down there are about this tall, and the floor of the crater is very soft. It's almost like a sponge. It's material that when the meteorite hit went up into the air. It's like if you drop a big rock into a pond of water, you get a big splash that comes straight, or a lot of it comes straight up and then goes right back down. Originally, the crater was, at the second when everything was thrown out, the crater was probably over 1,000, between 1,000 and 1,500 feet deep. Again, when all the material went back in, it left the crater that's now only about 570 feet deep. At the time, the water table was higher. If you look closely, you can see sort of a round circle of vegetation at the bottom. It's a little bit different color than the area around it. And when the crater was first formed, that part of the floor of the crater was below the water table, so there was a pond down there for a number of years, and fossils indicate that there definitely was pond life down there. Then as the water table has lowered over the last 50,000 years, the pond went away and left a round circle in the bottom of the crater. It's interesting, the boulders that you can see down there, this one is about 25 feet long and probably 15 feet high. From over there you can see there's some over here. One looks like a big turtle shell. It looks, just doesn't look much bigger than the size of a BB when you're looking at it. It's about 30 feet high and 30 feet long. The dimensions of the thing are just, there's nothing to give them any perspective. The rock wall down there doesn't look like it's very high. It looks like from here maybe 30 or 40 feet high. It's actually probably 100 to 150 feet high. One of the most commonly asked questions when we have an opportunity to visit the tourists out here is, what's that white stuff at the bottom of the crater? And the white stuff at the bottom of the crater is pulverized coconino sandstone that was brought out of the original mine shaft, the main mine shaft, when they were digging it. The equipment next to it, there's a steam boiler that generated steam for the steam-powered winch, which is right next to it. And that was used to raise and lower material and equipment in and out of that main shaft when they were digging it. And over to the left, you can see another shaft that looks like it has a couple doors on it, and that in fact is what it is. That's a shaft that USGS put those doors on there. It's about 140 feet deep, and USGS still periodically comes out and does some research down there. It has solar panels there, and they generate electricity for lights that go down. One of the next projects that they hope to get to is to cut a slice down the side of that shaft from top to bottom and take it back and analyze the fossils in it to see what type of life was living at what point in time since the crater was formed. The west end of the museum concerns itself with meteorites and the science of meteoritics and the study of the mechanics of impact cratering. This room, over on the north wall, we have 7 paintings by Don Davis that depict the scientist's impression of what happened at the time of impact. On the south wall, we have various things that were formed by the meteorite striking the earth. We have shocked sandstone in various stages of how much they were shocked. We have shatter cones, which are something that's very specific to impact craters. Okay, on the south wall also there's an example of a meteorite that contains a diamond, an industrial grade diamond, and those were formed by the pressure within the meteorite and carbon deposits that are in the meteorites. There's some examples of tektites that are byproducts of impact that have been found around the world. And also we have an example of a meteorite that's from Russia, from one of the impacts that was in 1947 in Russia, and they've loaned this piece of meteorite to us. This is the Halsinger meteorite. It was the largest of the meteorite fragments that's been found in the surrounding area. It was found about 2.5 miles away. As small as it appears, this piece of meteorite weighs over 1,400 pounds. It's 92% iron, 7% nickel, and there is some iridium and cobalt in it. These are very sought after right now. Collectors around the world are paying a considerable amount of money for pieces of meteorite from the Meteor crater area. It is illegal to come out and hunt and dig up pieces of the meteorite, but we still have folks trying to do it. And we spend a considerable amount of time trying to discourage people from coming out and stealing meteorites, as much as they're trying to discourage people from taking petrified wood from the petrified forest. It's a finite resource that will not be easily replaced, and we're trying to protect what is left out there from the pot hunters that are trying to steal what is left out there. Behind me on the wall over here, you may be able to see a display that puts the depth of the crater into perspective, but it does indicate that the Washington Monument, if put on the bottom of the crater, on the floor of the crater, would just about reach to the top. Another bit of information, you could play 20 Super Bowl games at one time on the floor of the crater and have room for over 2 million people to sit around the edge while the games were going on. They could play most of the NFL season in one day right here if they wanted to. So it is a tremendous sized impact crater, even though it is one of the smaller impact craters that they've discovered. The next impact is hard to predict, and there are people trying very hard right now to track the larger asteroids and meteorites that are in space. Dr. Gene Shoemaker, who is very instrumental in researching a lot of the information that we have about Meteor crater, is at the forefront of tracking the Earth-crossing asteroids and meteorites. Yet in visiting with those folks, it doesn't sound like anybody's in any imminent danger of having to dodge any meteorites anytime soon. But they feel that impacts of meteorites of the size that cause Meteor crater occur about every 100,000 years or so. So it sounds like we've got a little time to prepare for that eventuality if any preparation is done. In the size of the meteorites or asteroids that struck the Yucatan, those they feel hit every 65 to 100 million years. So it looks like we've got quite a while before we have to start worrying about that one coming again. Meteorites do fall on a regular basis. Each year it's estimated 22,000 tons of meteorites fall and strike the Earth. Many of them are very small, maybe not weighing more than just a few ounces. Once in a while you'll hear about one that maybe weighs a couple pounds that goes through the roof of somebody's house. A recent one went through the trunk of a car in New York, and I guess there was the car was borrowed at the time, so there's some debate over whether the meteorite belongs to the person who owned the car or the person who had borrowed the car. So there's a lot of debate over the years relating to meteorites and impact sites, and it appears that debate still goes on today. Meteor crater is located in northern Arizona, about 25 miles west of Winslow or 35 miles east of Flagstaff. And I-40 is about 5.5 miles north of Meteor crater. And we have easy access off the interstate. And contrary to what many people ask us about, no, nobody was hurt on the freeway when the meteorite struck.
Brad, thank you very much for having us here at the crater. We've enjoyed it. I know that the audience has. Why don't you invite them down, if you will, and give them again the location off of I-40.
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for coming out to visit us.
It was our pleasure.
And I'd like to invite all the folks out there to come and see us. We're between Winslow and Flagstaff, Arizona, about 5 miles south of I-40 on exit 233. We look forward to seeing you all.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that documentary as much as we enjoyed visiting this place. To see the striking point of this meteor certainly was a fascinating thing, and I highly recommend if you're ever driving down 40 and you're near Winslow, keep your eye peeled for this great crater. And look at it in this vein. Many things happen down through the years to this planet, to our Father's universe. These things are all important. I really believe that there is a possibility between this meteor and the one in Yucatan that it could have had something to do with this changing of the plates. Therefore, the rhinoceroses, the African animals that we find at Ash Falls, Nebraska, that perhaps they were joined at one time. What an exciting thing when we see the power of God's creation when something runs a little wild, such as a meteor colliding with the earth. Planned by God, of course, He allows it in His perfect place and design for everything. Since the overthrow, things just haven't been quite right. So look at it in that respect, and I'm sure that you'll be able to gain a great deal and to know this, that there is a possibility that we're going to witness in this generation another meteor strike, a large one, strike one of the other planets. It's very possible. Some people are claiming that. Is it true? Well, I can't document it, but it has been reported that one will strike, and we'll be able to see it through telescope. So, God's earth and His universe, it's something to really think about and to consider, even as it is written into His Word concerning the stars, His Bible in the sky. And we see, again, as I state, this great spot. Again, it's a wonderful side trip if you're driving down I-40 and getting bored and need to be woke up a little bit. Take a moment. It's only a short distance from I-40. Drive over and see this crater, the majesty of force of God's own nature. It is so very, very impressive to be there. I know you'll enjoy it, as I stated, as we enjoyed bringing this to you. Okay, God bless you. Have a good day.